Good morning, everyone. It's Miss Maneely, and I am providing you with a video tutorial on how to do the data analysis section of your project on your sample survey. I'm going to be using a website called theartofstat.com, which is a little bit easier than using Excel. So I'm going to keep the tutorials for Excel in case anyone wants to try it with Excel, but this other website I think actually makes the data analysis and constructing your graphs very, very, very simple once you have your data table saved. So I'm just going to kind of run through the different aspects of the project. The first part of the project included identifying a population, describing your sampling method, and then coming up with a survey of questions to ask your sample. So everyone should have done that at this point. You should have collected your data. And so the second part of the project includes creating a data table. I would suggest doing that in Excel. So I've already got an example for you. This is actually data that I collected from my students last year. And I'll just kind of run through some of the questions that I asked them had to do with their gender, the highest math class they had taken, any other math classes that they were concurrently enrolled in, the reason for taking AP statistics, how many other AP classes they were taking, or how many AP classes total. I asked them about their first marking period grade, the resources that they find the most valuable, how many hours on average they spend studying for AP statistics, and then the number of redos they completed first marking period. And so obviously you can see that I've got both categorical and quantitative data, and that's necessary in order to do the data analysis section of your project. So when you're creating your project, obviously you're going to want to do it in Microsoft Word. So I just sort of laid out what your project should look like. The very first thing you want to include is your introduction, and that's pretty much going to include all the information from part one. So it's going to include a description of your population in detail, so make sure you're referring to Southern High School, make sure you're referring to the fall semester of the year or the school year 2017-18 or whatever year it is when you're watching this. You also want to make sure that you describe your sampling method in detail. So don't just say, I used my calculator to draw a random sample. You want to be very specific about how you labeled your population, whether you had to label it with a 2-digit number or a 3-digit number if your population was large. And then if you used a different type of random number generator, what was the name of that program? If you used a random digit table, what line did you start on? So you want to be very, very clear. And then you want to talk about how you either generated numbers, ignoring repeats, or you were looking through a table and looking at either 2 digits at a time or 3 digits at a time, ignoring repeats and ignoring any other digits that came up, and then assigning the digits that came up to the members of your population. Once you have your introduction, you want to either include, and you can either retype your survey questions so they fit neatly in your project or in your report, or you can attach them as an addendum. Just make sure you include a reference. So like after the introduction, you want to say, survey questions are attached or data table is attached, because you do want to also include your data table. I do not need a list of your population again. I only need the data table. And if you have the student names, I know some of you did an anonymous survey, so you wouldn't know which students produced the data, so you could just have them numbered. But there should be a data table like what I'm showing you here. So this is the data table that I created in Excel. And notice that it was an anonymous survey for me, so I don't have the student names. If you have the student names, then you can include them, and obviously then I can see your sample. But that part isn't required in your final report. The biggest part of your report is the analysis. So once you have your data table, I want to show you how you can actually construct the graphs and then what kinds of things you should be writing about in each of the sections. So if you look at your project, we all should be moving on to part 3, which is the report part, the data analysis and summary of the findings. And for this year, the school year 2017, I've adjusted the due dates. So they're actually going to be December 18th and 19th. And again, that's for the school year 2017-18. Your final report should be typed. It should include proper symbols and notation, and graphical displays must be computer generated. And like I said, I'm doing the tutorials now, and I'll actually show you how you can use the equation editor in Word to type your equations. So let's go ahead and jump down to the first part of the data analysis. The first part requires you to compare two or more subgroups for one quantitative variable. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pick a quantitative variable that I'm interested in, and then a categorical data. So I've already kind of started to format my project or my report. So in the first part of the analysis, I'm going to select one quantitative variable to analyze over the values of one categorical. So let me go to my survey. So one quantitative variable that I'm interested in is marking period grades. And I'm kind of interested in comparing them over gender. Like, is there a difference between how girls perform in my class and boys perform? But one of the things I noted is that not everybody reported their marking period grade. So I'm going to have to remove those values from my data set when I'm doing this part of the analysis. I'm not going to delete these kids entirely. It's just for this part of the analysis, I can't include them because I don't have their grades. So I'm going to show you some tricks for sorting the data in Excel if you're not familiar with that. You'll notice that I have headings. So I'm going to just, whenever you're sorting, you want to make sure that you highlight the entire table, because if you just highlight certain rows or columns, then you'll resort just that part of the table and not all the others. So your data is not going to be aligned anymore. So I'm going to select my entire table. I'm going to hit my data up here. If you notice, there's a tab that says data, and then there's an icon that says sort. So what I want to do is I want to sort by marking period grade first, because I want to get those NAs, those kids that I don't have data for, I want to sort them either to the top or the bottom of my list. So you'll get a menu here, and notice there's a little box up here. It says my data has headers. If you've included titles on all of your columns, you want to check that box. Otherwise, it'll sort the headers in with the rest of your data, which you don't want to do. So I want to sort this by marking period 1 grade. And so when I do that, now what it's done is it's numerically sorted all those marking periods, but it's kept all of the row data in line. And if I go down to the bottom, you'll see those 3 students who did not provide me with their marking period grade. And that's fine. I'm just going to leave them out of this particular analysis. So like I said, I want to compare marking period grade by gender. So the easiest way for me to do this would be to now go back and notice that I'm not highlighting. Let me go back so you can see. I'm going to ignore these 3 students on the bottom because I don't have their marking period data. So now when I highlight the table, I'm leaving those 3 rows out. And so now what I want to do is I want to sort by gender, because ultimately I'm going to be constructing 2 histograms, one for my male students and one for my female students. So I'm going to go back to my sort menu, and this time when it asks to sort by, I'm going to select gender. And so now you'll notice that all my females are at the top and all my males are at the bottom. And then I've got those 3 students whose data I don't have at the very bottom. And when I do my write-up, I'm going to want to make sure that I mention that there were 3 students that did not provide me with their marking period grade and I had to leave them out. So now let's talk about how we're going to construct these histograms. So there's a website. If you go to theartofstat.com, and so if you're, let me just make sure I'm at the home screen. So if you go to artofstat.com, you're going to come to this website. And one of the coolest things that they offer are these web apps. And you can either click the tab at the top, or you can just click this square right there. And there are multiple web apps. And these are awesome. I haven't even begun to explore them all. But the first thing we want to do is explore some categorical data. Because again, I'm sorry, no we don't. We want to explore quantitative data. We are going to be looking at marking period grade over against the gender. So I'm going to be constructing 2 histograms. Again, a histogram of marking period grades for females and a histogram of marking period grades for males. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And you'll notice at the very top it talks about 1 sample or 2 or more samples. I'm doing 2 or more samples because I'm going to use men and women separately. Okay, so if I look at the top, it says how many groups or samples do you want to compare? You can compare up to 6. So for those of you that want to compare, like one of the other options that I could do, if I go back to my data table, is I could compare marking period grade to the highest level of math that my students have achieved. And actually, that's something I'd be very interested in. I would assume that students that took AP Calculus the year before would have higher grades than maybe students that came directly from Algebra 2 or perhaps Foundations of College Algebra, just because the Calc students are going to have more math under their belt. But I'd have to construct a different histogram for each math course. So I'd need to have a histogram for FOCA, a histogram for pre-calculus, a histogram for AP calculus, and so forth. So I'd need to have multiple histograms. In this case, I'm just going to kind of reduce it so I just have two, one for males and one for females. Okay, so if I'm back at my website, it asks for the name of the response variable. The name of the response variable, the variable that I'm interested in, is marking period 1 percentages. Okay, so that gives me my my marking period 1 percentages. And now I want to enter the observations for males and females. And unfortunately, one of the deficits of this program is you don't have a lot of options for formatting. So you can't change the titles on the graphs, which is kind of annoying. So you do want to make sure in your write-up that you are very, 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 very clear. So if I'm going to enter the female data in for group 1, I need to make sure in my summary, in my Word document, that I make sure that I label group 1 as females. So I'm going to go back to my Excel document. And what I want to do is I want to highlight the marking period 1 averages for just my female students. So I'm actually going to go to the bottom of my list because it's a little bit easier for me to see. And I can see that the last female student had a 93. And I'm just going to click and drag to include all the female data. And then you can either right click. So if I right click, I'm going to select copy. And you'll see that there's like that little outline about the data. And if I go now back to my website, and I can see on the bottom, this tab is my Google tab, and then I'm just going to right click again and paste it. And it'll paste it in order for me. Now you'll see the default is to construct box plots. I'm ultimately going to be constructing histograms. And so there's my data with the histogram. I also want to do the same thing for the male data. So I'm going to go down to my SurveyMonkey data on Excel. Click on that, and I'm going to scroll down. And now I want to collect all the data, all the marking period data for my male students. So the first male student had a 58, and I'm going to scroll down, and again, I'm going to ignore the data that I don't have, that NA. If I right click, I can copy, and then if I go back to my website, in group 2, I'm going to right click and paste. And what's really awesome about this is that it'll automatically create 2 histograms with the exact same scales. If you were using Excel, there's a lot of formatting that you have to do to fix the histograms to make it work. So you would have to adjust your x-axis and your y-axis and the width of the bars, and it can be kind of annoying. So this is all you have to do really for this first part. You'll notice up at the top you've got your descriptive statistics. So you've got the mean, you've got the standard deviation for both distributions, and it does report the interquartile range. How great is that? So that gives you everything you need. Now the next thing you want to do is transfer this to a Word document. And there's a couple different ways that you can do that. The program, if you scroll down the bottom, it'll give you an option to download the plot. Unfortunately, it doesn't give you the option to download the descriptive statistics, which again, it's kind of annoying. But if I go to download the plot, you'll notice that it comes up with a download of a PNG file. And then usually what I do once I get here, again, if you just go to the image and right click it, you can copy the image. And then I'm going to go into my, my Word document where I'd started outlining my project. So this first part of my analysis has to do with the quantitative variable that I'm evaluating over several subgroups. So if I right click, I can paste. And there it is. Now, if I want the all those summary statistics, which I do want, there's another way that you can do a screenshot. I know some of you are probably familiar with just using the keyboard screenshot, but I found there's actually another program that makes taking screenshots really, really easy, and you can do it with any program on your computer. So if you go to your Start menu to Programs, and you go into Microsoft Office, you want to open OneNote. So if you open up OneNote, it may give you the option, sometimes it does this, so obviously I already have mine open. Sometimes it'll give you an option where it asks you to log in, and just click out of there. You don't actually have to log into it. But this is OneNote is a way that you can do screen clippings and it'll save them all for you in an online forum, but I don't even know how that works. So I just use it for the screenshot. So if you go to the Insert menu, there is an option here where it says screen clipping. And if you click that, it'll get your computer to a place where now you can do a screen clipping. And now if you go to like descriptive statistics and just click and drag, it's actually going to do a screenshot for you. And it's automatically saving that to a clipboard. Now it might not say it. It might pop up a window asking you, do you want to save it to a clipboard or do you want to save it to OneNote? I usually just have it automatically save to a clipboard. So if I go back to my Word document and I want to put the descriptive statistics above my graph, I can do it right here. And if it's too big, if I click on it, I can right click to size and position. And then I can reduce it. So like if I want to make it maybe 75%, I can make it a little bit smaller, or you can just right click and click and drag to make that bigger or smaller. But what else I like about this using OneNote, let me see if I can just kind of make that a little bit smaller so it fits on one page. So what else I like about this is that if you look down at the bottom right hand part of my screen, you'll see this little purple notebook that has an N and then a screen clipping. Once you open it up once, you'll have that screen clipping on your toolbar forever, which is awesome because you don't have to constantly open up OneNote to be able to use it. So in fact, I'm going to go ahead and close OneNote and you'll see that that little icon is still there. And so that makes my life really easy. Everything I do, I use this to do my screen clippings. Okay, so now that I've got my histograms, I've got my descriptive statistics, now I want to do my summary. So this is where you want to make sure that you contrast several histograms, or that should say construct several histograms using the same scale. Let me fix that. You want to construct several histograms using the same scale, which this program does for us, which is awesome. Now, this is when we want to go back to what we did in the very first chapter, where we compared the shape, the center, and the spread of the two distributions in the context of our survey. So in this case, I'm looking at the distribution of marking period grades. Again, in my write-up, I'm going to want to make sure that I include something that group 1 refers to the females and group 2 refers to the males. In fact, I could do if I go to insert, I can insert a text box. And I can do that right here. If I insert a text box, I can say group 1 equals females and group 2 equals males. And that way you don't forget. But then underneath, you want to make sure that you actually do the description. So I might say, for example, that the distribution of marking period grades for my females is skewed to the left, or is more skewed to the left than the distribution for males, which seems to be relatively symmetric. I could say that the mean for my girls, so the girls in my class tended to do about 5% better than the males in my class that particular year. So again, this is from last year. And if I want to compare the means, then I'd also want to compare the standard deviation. So not only did my female students tend to perform better, but their grades were more consistent. If I look at the standard deviation for my females was smaller than it was for my males. One of the things that sometimes confuses students is like one distribution is skewed and one distribution is symmetric. So then it's like, do I compare the medians or do I compare the means? It doesn't really matter. You just want to be consistent. In a situation like this, I think it's a little bit easier and more common to just compare the mean and the standard deviation. But if both distributions were skewed, I would definitely compare the medians and the interquartile ranges, which actually reports the same conclusions, right? The median for the females is still higher than the males, and our interquartile range is less, indicating that, again, the female scores are a little bit more consistent than they are for the males. Okay, so the next thing you want to compare is two categorical variables and indicate whether or not there's a relationship between them. So this time you're going to have to make a two-way table describing the joint distribution of the variables and create a side-by-side bar graph. So again, this kind of goes back to what we did in our summer assignment. Now, I'm not sure that we really had to construct too many of these. And actually, this program enables us to do it really easily. So I'm going to go to my survey data, my SurveyMonkey data, and I want to pick two categorical variables that I'm interested in comparing. And one of the things that always interests me as a teacher is I want to know what resources my students find most valuable. And again, I'm interested in that relationship against gender. So I want to know, do females prefer Bulldog Block over males, and so forth. So these are the two. Let me go ahead and highlight them so you can see that. Let's see, that's a fill, right? Yeah. So if I want to look at gender and the resource that my students find most valuable, those are the two variables that I want to compare. If I go back to my menu, so I'm going to go back to my Art of Stat, and so you'll notice that like when you create a new graph, it opens up a new tab on your web. If I go back to the last tab, this brings me back to the home page for artofstat.com. And this time I want to compare two categorical variables. So now I'm going to go back to that very first web app because it's talking about exploring categorical data. And I'm looking at two categorical variables. So if I go to the top, I'm going to go ahead and click that. And it asks enter data. I'm going to enter it in as a contingency table. That's a two-way table. And so you'll know that you have a row variable and a column variable. So I'm going to go ahead and let my row variable be gender. And then the category labels, we're just going to separate them by a comma. So I'll go ahead. It's already in there as female and male. That's the default. And then my column variable would be, I don't know, most valuable resource. And one of the things that I found when I was practicing this, just to make sure it would work for you guys, is that if the category labels are too long, the formatting gets really weird. So try to abbreviate your category labels as much as you can so it fits nicely. And then you can always, in fact, if you want to call it A, B, C, D, E, and then create your own key or legend, you can do that. So the category labels, notice that they're all sort of out of, they're not in any kind of order. So I've got my females in order. I've got my males in order. Actually, no, I don't. I don't have all my females in order because there were a couple people that I left out before. So let me show you what I want to do next. I want to basically, because I'm going to be creating a two-way table, and I want to know exactly how many females prefer Bulldog Block. But I can see that the valuable resources are all sort of mixed up. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to highlight, and actually let me just go ahead and pull up my whole table, and I'm going to include those 3 students that I left out before because I have the data that I need for this part of my analysis, so I'm not going to leave them out this time. And so now when I go to my data menu and to sort, I still want to keep gender separate. So I'm going to sort by gender. But I also want to sort by the most valuable resource so that like I can have all my females listed, but then I'll have all my female Bulldog Block people together, my female Blackboards together, and so forth. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a level, and then I'm going to sort by, if I click in there, and again, you want to make sure that your data has headers is clicked so that you can see all the titles of your rows. And I want to click on most valuable resource. And so when I do that, it's going to sort all my females and the resources that they find most valuable. And if I scroll down, they do the same thing for the males. And so you can see there's quite a few options that I included in the survey for the most valuable resource. So what I need to do on my website, if I go to Art of Stat, is I need to list all those categories. So if you guys are familiar, you can hit the Alt-Tab button and you can flip back and forth between your pages. So I know that Blackboard and Bulldog Block were both resources, but if I abbreviate them, I have to be careful because I would abbreviate them both with a BB. So I'm going to say B board, comma, and B block, comma. And it just says to separate them with commas. Again, if I hit Alt-Tab, excuse me, I can see I had online resources, other students, reviewing notes, textbook, tutor, and videos. There were lots of different options that students could choose. So online resources and other students, if I just put another, so online, I'm just going to leave it as online. I'll do other students and just say students. We've got review notes, textbook, so I'll do another comma. Let's see, notes, comma, text, comma, and then we've got tutor and videos. So tutor, so if they hired a tutor, and then the videos that I create. So those are all my outcomes. Those are all my possible label. So if I press enter, and you'll notice that like the contingency table, it starts to create. So unfortunately, it doesn't create a long enough contingency table. So all of my values for my categorical variable on the resource, notice that they kind of have to go down to the next level. So this should be a two-way table, but because the way it's formatted, the table doesn't extend horizontally long enough, so it just scoots down to another page or another section. And then the conditional distribution, this would be looking at the percentages. So now what I need to do, if you notice, it says enter the counts for your contingency table. And so what I need to do is enter the number of females that preferred Blackboard. So again, I'm going to hit Alt-Tab to go back and forth between my data table and my program. And I can see that there were 3 female students who preferred Blackboard. So I'm going to Alt-Tab, and I can put a 3 in there. And if I tab over, now I want to figure out the number of females that prefer Bulldog Block. And there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Tab over. I only had 1 student that preferred the online resources. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 who enjoyed working with other students. 1, 2, 3, 4 that reviewed their notes as the most valuable resource. I have 1 textbook, 1 tutor, and then the videos. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, and now if I go to the males, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to scroll over and count how many males preferred Blackboard, and there were 3 of them. Obviously, I didn't have as many males, and this I think was my entire class, all my classes, or all the students that completed the survey. So I think I had 56 students and 53 or 52 of them completed the survey. So let's see, where did I leave off? Bulldog Block. So there's 3 students that preferred Bulldog Block. I think there was 1 that used the online resources. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They used other students. 1, 2, 3, 4 that asked questions in class. So there were nobody that used their notes. Wait a minute. Did I not include that? I think I might have skipped that. So let me add that at the end here. Videos and then questions. Okay, so the male students found that asking questions in class. So 1, 2, 3, 4. I don't think there were any females that did that, or did I mess that up? Yeah, so no females found that asking questions in class was valuable. And then 3 males preferred using their notes. And then 3 using videos. So nobody with text or tutor, and 3 with videos. Is that right? 3, yeah. Okay, so now I have my two-way table. And if you scroll down, you'll see now you have your side-by-side bar graphs. But you'll see what I mean. That the labels get sort of jumbled. The other thing that we want to do is I don't want 2 separate graphs. I want 1 graph where the bars are side by side. And so notice that when it talks about the type of bar graph, you can click side by side and it'll give you 1 graph. And it'll give you the legend over here at the side, so you can compare the distribution for males and females. And you'll notice that like these aren't that jumbled together. It's not too bad. But one of the things that you can do to make it look a little bit better, if you hit the control button and then you'll notice on your mouse you've got the spinner. If you spin that down a little bit or up, wait, mine's not working. If you use the spinner down, you can sort of decrease, you can zoom in or zoom out, and so it enables you to spread that graph out a little bit more. And so now mine looks pretty good. And so you have 2 things you can do. You can either download the bar graph, and it'll open up that PNG file. But notice it does. It looks pretty bad. So again, I don't think it'll work this time. So here we go. Yeah, zooming in and zooming out, it doesn't look very good here. So I'm not going to use that option. Instead, I'm going to use that notebook screen clipping. So if you click that, you could also use your window button and the S, and that's a shortcut command. So if you hit window and S, That's a shortcut for doing a screen clipping using the OneNote screen clipping image. So you can do that. That's what I'm going to do. And then if I go back to my document, again, the two categorical variables, I can go ahead and paste that bar graph in there. Now notice that like the title of your bar graph says, bar graph of conditional percentages. You're going to want to describe this so that it's more in context. So you want to make sure that you talk about comparing the most valuable resources of the male and the female students. You'll also notice if we go back to the website that your contingency table is showing, and then this conditional distribution simply shows the percentages. So we had about 9% of our females that preferred Bulldog Block, Blackboard, 28 that preferred Bulldog Block, and so forth. Unfortunately, this table just doesn't really, you can't really download it very easily. So I would actually just recommend that you reconstruct the contingency table on your paper, because you do need to include that. Let me see if you download the bar graph. I guess it doesn't show up. I was hoping that there was a way to include that. Actually, look, I think you might be able to change the title. So if I did, most valuable resource, you could actually change the title here. But unfortunately, it doesn't look like you can download the contingency tables unless you did it. Like, you'll see that it just doesn't. It's so annoying that the formatting is off. But you do want to make sure that you include that the contingency table with your data. So what I would just do is so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different outcomes. If you go to insert, you've actually got a table right here. So I'm going to have a row for my titles, a row for males, a row for females, and I forget what I just counted, but so if you had your females here and your males here, and then I know I've got Blackboard, Bulldog Block. You can enter in your values here. You can also, if you highlight your title, I think it's if you do layout, there's an option for text direction. So you can change the text direction so that it's, and then maybe like pull that, there you go. So you can create your two-way table on your document itself, and that way it matches. Things that you want to comment on, though, when it comes to the analysis would be like, in terms of gender, it looks like both the males and the females found that working with other students was the most beneficial. The other thing they agreed on was using their class notes. Even the videos seem to be, both genders seem to think that the videos were helpful. The differences really occurred with Bulldog Block. We definitely had more females preferring Bulldog Block, whereas males preferred asking questions in class. So those are the kinds of things that you'd want to mention, and then you'd want to also include like the percentages, and that's of course something that you would do in your table. So just summarize, all you're going to have to do is transfer the information, and I would use the percentages because we have a different count for males and females. So use the percentages distribution here and just transfer the information from this table into the table on your paper, and that way you can say, the percentages that are the closest. So for example, both genders, we had over 20% of both genders choosing working with other students as one of the most valuable things. They also agreed, over 10% agreed that notes were very beneficial. And then comment on where the differences were. Okay, the very last part that you need to explore would be the relationship between two quantitative variables. And so this would be when you're going to construct a scatter plot. So if I go to the last part, I'm going to choose two quantitative variables that I want to investigate to see if there's a linear relationship between them. You're going to construct a scatter plot, a residual plot, and you're also going to perform a regression analysis. You're going to comment on the strength of the relationship by computing values for your correlation coefficient and your coefficient of determination. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at our survey monkey, and I'm going to go ahead and just let me get rid of those highlights so that we don't get confused. All right, and so what I want to do is I want to look at, let's see, maybe look at the number of hours that students study and their marking period grade. Those would be the two quantitative variables that I'd be interested in. The only thing is, again, I have those 3 students that did not produce their marking period grade. So I do need to sort my data again so I can remove those 3 students from my data. And so I'm going to highlight all my data. I'm going to go to my data sort. And notice that I've got these 2 levels. I don't want to continue sorting by both levels. So if I click on the bottom level, I can delete it. And I just want to sort by the marking period grade. Okay, and that way, if I scroll down, you'll see that the last 3 students whose grades I don't have, I'm just going to ignore them. Okay, and so my hypothesis would be that the number of hours studying would be connected to the marking period grade, and I would expect there to be a positive relationship there. I would expect my number of hours studying to be the explanatory variable and the marking period grade to be the response. So if I go to my website, again, I'm going to go back to that home screen, which is that interactive web tab. And if I scroll down, association and linear regression, you'll see that there are 6 different web apps. The one that we want to choose is the one that says Fit Linear Regression Model. So if I click on that, it's going to produce a scatter plot for me. And so it says to enter the values for the explanatory and response variable or copy and paste them from a spreadsheet. So again, unfortunately, I can't rename what it's calling my explanatory variable or my response. I just have to enter in the data. So if I go to my SurveyMonkey data, I'm going to do my number of hours as my explanatory variable. So I'm just going to click and drag. And again, I don't want to include those last 3 people because I can't use their grade point, their marking period grade. If I right click, I can copy. And again, if I go to my explanatory variable, if I right click, I can paste. And it'll automatically, it's kind of hard to see. Actually, let me increase. There we go. And it's all in there. If you're going to enter it in one at a time, you have to make sure that you're entering in the data so that your X and Y variables are entered in the same order. It's just as easy to just click and copy and paste. So I'm going to select my marking period averages. I'm going to right click and copy. I'm going to Alt Tab and get back to my other screen. I can also do Control V and that'll paste. And that's what the scatter plot looks like. So obviously I can comment on the scatter plot and I can see that it's definitely a very, very, very weak association. Notice the options that you have here. It says to show the prediction equation and line on the plot. So I'm going to click that, and notice now at the top it gives me my regression equation. It gives me y hat is equal to 77.7 plus 0.945. So if I were to interpret the slope, which is what I would expect you to do, I could say something with every, as I increase the number of hours, or as a student increases the number of hours they study by 1, I can expect the marking period average to increase by about 0.945. So almost 1% for every hour studying, according to this regression analysis. Now that doesn't mean causation. It doesn't mean that everyone should now study for 1 extra hour and they're going to increase their grade by a percentage, but it does give us a relationship there. So a couple other things you want to select here for the options, where it says to compute the correlation coefficient and R squared. I'm going to go ahead and click yes there. And so if you scroll down, you'll see the parameters of interest. You've got your y-intercept, you've got your slope, and then the association between x and y. Now they're using a Pearson correlation coefficient, which I think is the same thing as a regular correlation coefficient. You might find that it's not exactly the square root of r squared, and that's just because the value of r squared that they've given you is rounded. But there's your r squared, there's your r value, here's your equation. Whoops, your equation's up here. And again, if you can either go down to your screen clipping option and take a screen clipping this way. And so we've got our scatter plot. And if I go back to my document, I can plug that in right here. And then we also know that I can do the same thing to get my correlation coefficient and R squared. or you can just type them in your project and your report. That's fine too. Okay. And so things you want to do in this write-up would be to describe the association. Again, make sure you define your variables, because you can't, that's a kind of a shortcoming of this particular program, is you can't do a lot of formatting. So you want to make sure that you define X as the number of hours studying and Y as the marking period average. You also want to mention that we had to remove 3 students from our data list because they didn't provide the information. You're going to want to interpret your slope, your y-intercept. You're going to want to talk about the strength and direction according to your correlation coefficient. It's only 0.19, so obviously it's not very strong. Your coefficient of determination, I mean, this is pretty much telling me that 4%, only 4% of the variation in the marking period average can be explained by this linear regression equation on the number of hours studying. So that means 96% of the marking period average is due to other factors. So again, that's something that you would write up then down here. And then your conclusion, that you should definitely conclude, provide a summary of all of your findings, if any. And again, at the beginning of your project, if you had described what you anticipated, you should be able to return to that and comment, did you see the relationships that you expected? Did you have any surprises? If you could go back and do it again, would there be other questions you'd be interested in asking? Would there be other things you want to explore? But I think that this new program, theartofstat.com, will enable you to construct really nice graphs very, very quickly. And again, you can probably do this all in one Bulldog block as long as you have your data table in Excel. It makes it very easy. Feel free to come in and use my computers whenever you need to. If you want to email me your project to review before you submit it on the 18th or the 19th, you can do that. I'm happy to give you feedback. Remember, there are no redos. If you want to come in and take a look at any student samples from years past, you may do that. I do not post them anymore because I had too many people that were kind of copying, and that was not something that I want to happen. I want this to obviously be your original work. So anyway, email me if you have any questions. Come into Bulldog Block. I'm happy to help you. Good luck. I'm excited to see what you do with all this.